Trump just hit the nuclear button on Canada trade talks, and it all started with a 60-second advertisement featuring Ronald Reagan. We're talking about a complete breakdown in U.S.-Canada relations over what Ontario Premier Doug Ford calls a simple conversation starter. But this isn't just about an advertisement. This is about Trump's fury at being challenged using the words of his own Republican hero, and how one Canadian province just played the ultimate political chess move. So what exactly happened? On October 16th, Doug Ford posted a minute-long advertisement that would change everything. This surprise move came late at night, after 11 p.m. Eastern, when Trump discovered that Ontario had launched a massive campaign using Reagan's own words against his tariff policies.
We're going to begin the hour with the very latest on this morning's breaking news. U.S. President Donald Trump is dropping another bombshell in the U.S. trade war with Canada. He is ending all negotiations over tariffs in a surprise move late last night because of this ad, which Ontario paid for to run on U.S. television.
But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. America's jobs and growth are at stake.
Using an address from Ronald Reagan, that's some of the ad that triggered Trump's rage, and he now appears to be flipping over the table on trade talks a little over 2 weeks after what appeared to be a cordial meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Donald Trump at the White House. It's unclear right now if Carney had any warning of this. As we've been reporting, the two leaders have been texting and talking on the phone throughout what has been a grinding negotiation process. Chris Reyes is covering the U.S. story for us and leads off our coverage. So this decision late last night, Chris, it was after 11 p.m. Eastern, apparently out of the blue, and he's saying more this morning again on his social media platform. What is the latest?
The timing was deliberate, the execution was flawless, and the reaction was explosive. The advertisement featured excerpts from Ronald Reagan's 1987 radio address about free trade. Let me show you what Reagan actually said. In his address, Reagan explained how tariffs may seem patriotic by protecting American jobs initially, but ultimately harm American workers and consumers in the long run. He warned that high tariffs lead to retaliation from foreign countries, triggering trade wars that cause markets to collapse and millions to lose their jobs. Reagan drew from history, referencing the Smoot-Hawley tariff that deepened the Great Depression, detailing how protectionist policies create a vicious cycle where industries become complacent, innovation stops, prices rise artificially, and ultimately businesses shut down with massive job losses. This wasn't just a nigh old campaign ad. Ontario spent a staggering 75 million Canadian dollars, that's about 54 million US, to run this ad across American television networks including Fox, NBC, and Newsmax. They timed it perfectly, running during Major League Baseball's American League Championship Series, reaching over 9 million viewers in one night alone. But here's where things get explosive. Trump's fury was instant and unmistakable.
With Canada on Truth Social, he called Ontario's ad fake, called Canada's actions egregious, and then accused Canada of trying to interfere with the Supreme Court and other courts which are considering challenges to Trump's tariffs. And he has posted again this morning, Heather, sounding very angry, full of accusations. On Truth Social, he posted, "Canada cheated and got caught. They fraudulently took a big buy ad saying that Ronald Reagan did not like tariffs when actually he loved tariffs for our country," Trump writes. He said that he loved that tariffs for the U.S.'s national security. Trump again accused Canada of trying to illegally influence the United States Supreme Court and then cheating on tariffs. And then he thanked the Ronald Reagan Foundation for exposing this fraud. Now, this angry reaction, Heather, is a little bit surprising because earlier this week, it seemed that Trump saw the ad, the Ontario ad.
On Thursday night, he took to Truth Social with all caps rage, calling Ontario's ad fake and Canada's actions egregious. He accused Canada of trying to interfere with the Supreme Court and other courts considering challenges to Trump's tariffs. Trump posted that Canada cheated and got caught and claimed they fraudulently misrepresented Reagan's position on tariffs, insisting Reagan loved tariffs for our country for national security reasons. He thanked the Reagan Foundation for exposing this fraud and declared that based on their egregious behavior, all trade negotiations with Canada are hereby terminated. Now let's pause here because this reaction tells us everything about Trump's mindset. This isn't the first time he's terminated trade talks with Canada. Back in June, he did the exact same thing over Canada's digital services tax. But this time feels different. This time, it's personal. Trump saw Reagan, a beloved Republican icon, being used against his signature economic policy, and he couldn't handle it. The Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute immediately backed Trump's position, claiming the ad misrepresents the presidential radio address and that Ontario did not seek nor receive permission to use and edit the remarks. They announced they were reviewing their legal options. But here's the thing, and this is crucial. The actual content of Reagan's speech supports the ad's message. Trade expert Douglas Irwin puts this in perfect context.
Absolutely not. I think they're really just positioning themselves to avoid the wrath of the president.
That's Douglas Irwin, professor of economics from Dartmouth College and expert on U.S. trade history.
The ads does not misrepresent his views. He was very much in favor of free trade.
This 1987 speech was made when the Republican president had just imposed 100% tariffs on some Japanese electronics over what Reagan said was
Clear evidence that Japanese companies were engaging in unfair trade practices.
But Reagan made it clear in this address that he wasn't into tariffs.
He didn't want to do that, but it was sort of forced under the circumstances at the time. But once the U.S. economy began to recover, he vetoed protectionist legislation coming from Congress. He opened up these trade negotiations with Canada and other countries to lead to freer trade.
So what about Trump's claims that Reagan loved tariffs?
No, actually, Reagan was a free trader. Sometimes people say, well, he was like Trump because he imposed the protectionism on the auto industry in the early 1980s. But once again, he did so reluctantly, whereas Trump is very enthusiastic and says this will be great.
Reagan was genuinely a free trader who reluctantly imposed tariffs only when forced by circumstances, in stark contrast to Trump's enthusiastic embrace of tariffs. Reagan had just imposed tariffs on Japan in 1987, but he was clear about his reluctance. Reagan said he was loath to take that action and believed high tariffs had made the Great Depression worse. The context matters, but the message in the ad accurately reflects Reagan's overall philosophy on trade. Trump's fury intensified on Friday morning with another Truth Social post declaring Canada cheated and got caught. He claimed they fraudulently took a big buy ad saying that Ronald Reagan did not like tariffs, when actually he loved tariffs for our country and its national security. But this claim is simply false. Reagan's record shows he generally opposed tariffs and supported free trade principles. In 1988, Reagan called protectionism destructionism and declared that America's jobs, America's growth, America's future depend on trade that is free, open, and fair. Now here's where Doug Ford shows his political genius. Initially, Ford didn't back down, he doubled down. Ford's response was nothing short of masterful.
I heard that the president heard our ad. I'm sure he wasn't too happy, but it's real because it was coming from the best president the country's ever seen, Ronald Reagan. It's going to be focused right across the country, but also in Republican-held areas, because what I feel, the Reagan Republicans are going to be fighting with a MAGA group. And let's hope Reagan Republicans win.
It's not clear that the Ontario government has much to fear from the Reagan Foundation's claim of copyright infringement, as you were just discussing with Chris. The Premier's office pointing out last night that this is entirely in the public domain. And let's be frank, this isn't really a legal fight. This is a political one.
He acknowledged Trump wasn't too happy about the ad, but defended it as real because it came from the best president the country's ever seen, Ronald Reagan. Ford revealed the ad campaign would continue focusing on Republican-held areas, expressing hope that Reagan Republicans would win against the MAGA group in this ideological battle over trade policy. He even provided a link to Reagan's full speech, essentially saying, "Here, judge for yourself." This was a masterclass in standing your ground while providing receipts. But then Ford made his strategic retreat with a twist. After speaking with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, Ford announced that Ontario would pause the ad campaign starting Monday. But, and this is the brilliant part, not before it runs during the World Series games over the weekend. Ford said the ad would continue during Friday and Saturday's games, ensuring maximum visibility during one of America's biggest sporting events. The Toronto Blue Jays were facing the Los Angeles Dodgers in their first World Series appearance in 32 years, with fans lining up for merchandise and the entire country rallying behind their team. Former manager Cito Gaston threw the ceremonial first pitch, and the excitement across Toronto and Canada was palpable. Ford's statement was perfectly crafted. He said their intention was always to initiate a conversation about the kind of economy that Americans want to build and the impact of tariffs on workers and businesses. We've achieved our goal, having reached U.S. audiences at the highest levels. Translation: mission accomplished. We got Trump's attention, we got America's attention, and now we'll pause to let diplomacy work. This move is politically brilliant for several reasons. First, Ford gets to have his cake and eat it too. He gets the massive World Series audience while also appearing reasonable and diplomatic. Second, he successfully reframes the narrative from Canada interfering in U.S. politics to Canada starting an important conversation about economic policy. Third, he puts the ball back in Trump's court, making Trump look unreasonable if he doesn't resume talks. But let's talk about the bigger picture here. This dispute reveals the fundamental tension in Trump's approach to Canada. Canada is America's third largest source of imports, with over $410 billion worth of goods flowing south in 2024. The two countries share one of the world's longest peaceful borders and have deeply integrated supply chains, especially in the auto industry. Yet Trump treats Canada like an adversary rather than an ally. Trump's claim that the ad was designed to interfere with the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court adds another layer to this story. The Supreme Court is scheduled to hear oral arguments on November 5th regarding the legality of Trump's tariff powers. Trump is so invested in this case that he said he'd like to attend the oral arguments himself. The timing of Ontario's ad campaign, running through January, certainly overlaps with this crucial legal battle. The economic stakes couldn't be higher. Canada accounts for about 77% of its exports going to the United States, making this relationship absolutely critical for Canadian prosperity. Ontario, home to more than a third of Canada's population and the country's largest city, Toronto, has been particularly hard hit by Trump's tariffs, especially given its significant steel industry. Ambassador Frank McKenna noted that Ontario is suffering huge job losses in auto, steel, and lumber sectors. What makes this situation even more complex is the political dynamics at play. Doug Ford is a populist conservative who doesn't belong to the same party as Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney, yet both are united in opposing Trump's tariffs. This shows how Trump's trade policies have created rare bipartisan unity in Canada against American economic aggression. The relationship between Trump and Carney has been a roller coaster. Just weeks ago, in early October, Carney visited the White House, and relations seem to have been patched up. Trump spoke of the mutual love between the U.S. and Canada and called Carney a world-class leader. He even joked about a merger of the two countries. But even then, Trump hinted at possible conflict, saying, "We want Canada to do great, but there's a point at which we also want the same business." This pattern of Trump terminating and then resuming trade talks has become almost routine. Earlier this year saw the relationship's tensest moment when Ford threatened to halt exports of Canadian electricity to the United States, which would have sent U.S. energy bills surging, but he ultimately backed off that threat, showing his preference for negotiation over confrontation. The Reagan ad controversy also highlights Trump's complicated relationship with the Republican Party's recent history. Reagan remains a beloved figure among Republicans, representing an era of conservative leadership that many in the party still revere. By using Reagan's own words against Trump's tariff policies, Ontario essentially forced Trump to either accept criticism from a Republican icon or attack Reagan's legacy. Trump chose the latter, falsely claiming Reagan loved tariffs, which contradicts the historical record. What's particularly telling is how this dispute reveals Trump's sensitivity to criticism, especially when it comes from unexpected sources. A Canadian provincial government using an American president's words to critique current American policy shouldn't be enough to terminate an entire trade relationship worth hundreds of billions of dollars. But for Trump, it was. The timing of Ford's strategic pause is also worth noting. by agreeing to stop the ads after the World Series games, Ford ensures the controversy stays in the news cycle through one of America's most watched sporting events. Every mention of the dispute during World Series coverage effectively amplifies Ontario's anti-tariff message, even as they prepare to pause the actual ads. For Canadian Prime Minister Carney, this situation presents both challenges and opportunities. On one hand, he has to deal with Trump's unpredictable behavior and the economic uncertainty it creates. On the other hand, Ford's bold move has successfully put Trump's tariff policies in the spotlight and generated significant American media attention for the Canadian position. Carney's response has been measured and diplomatic. He said his government remains ready to continue talks to reduce tariffs in certain sectors and acknowledged that we can't control the trade policy of the United States. This positions Canada as the reasonable party seeking dialogue while Trump appears volatile and unpredictable. Brian Clow, former deputy chief to Trudeau, argues that Trump's reaction has nothing to do with the Supreme Court case as Trump claims, but is about Trump wanting unilateral concessions from Canada. The broader implications of this dispute extend far beyond U.S.-Canada relations. Trump's willingness to terminate trade talks over an advertisement sends a signal to other trading partners about his approach to international economic relationships. It suggests that Trump views any criticism of his policies, even from allies, as grounds for economic retaliation. This also raises questions about the future of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, which Trump negotiated during his first term. The three countries are due to review the agreement next year, and this latest dispute doesn't bode well for smooth negotiations. Canada and Mexico have already begun deepening their ties and boosting bilateral trade, potentially as a hedge against American unpredictability. U.S. officials have revealed they're now negotiating with Mexico separately, citing frustration that has built up over time and that Canadians have been very difficult to negotiate with. The Supreme Court case that Trump referenced adds another layer of complexity. If the court rules against Trump's tariff authority, it could fundamentally reshape his economic strategy. If they uphold his powers, it could embolden him to impose even more aggressive trade measures. Either way, the outcome will have major implications for U.S.-Canada relations. What's particularly striking about this entire episode is how a single advertisement has managed to expose the fragility of one of America's most important economic relationships. The fact that 60 seconds of Ronald Reagan talking about free trade could trigger such an extreme response from Trump reveals just how thin-skinned and unpredictable his approach to international relations has become. Market analysts note that despite $770 billion in trade between the U.S. and Canada, markets are yawning off this development, suggesting everyone has become inured to the president's fickleness. Ford's handling of this crisis offers a masterclass in political communications. He successfully turned what could have been a diplomatic disaster into a strategic victory. By standing firm initially, then making a calculated retreat that still achieves his goals, Ford has shown how smaller players can effectively challenge much larger ones in the modern media environment. The question now is what happens next? Will Trump actually follow through on his threat to permanently terminate trade talks? Or will this be another case of him backing down after making a dramatic announcement? Given his pattern of behavior, it's likely that behind-the-scenes diplomatic efforts will eventually lead to a resumption of negotiations, possibly with both sides claiming victory. The upcoming APEC summit provides an opportunity for Prime Minister Carney and Trump to meet face-to-face and potentially resolve this crisis. For American consumers, this dispute is a reminder of how integrated the North American economy has become. Canadian electricity, oil, lumber, and agricultural products are essential to American daily life. Any serious disruption to this trade relationship would be felt immediately in American households through higher prices and potential shortages. The Reagan ad controversy ultimately reveals the fundamental contradiction in Trump's approach to trade. He claims to be protecting American workers and businesses, yet his willingness to blow up relationships with America's closest allies and most important trading partners creates uncertainty and instability that hurts those same workers and businesses. As this story continues to unfold, one thing is clear. Doug Ford has successfully used Ronald Reagan's own words to put Trump in an impossible position. Trump can either acknowledge that his Republican hero opposed the very policies he's now championing, Or he can continue to falsely claim Reagan-supported tariffs, further damaging his credibility. Either way, Ford has achieved his goal of forcing a conversation about the real costs of Trump's trade war. And sometimes that's all you need to do to win.